Okay, thank you everyone for coming down to Speaker's Corner. Today we're discussing be it resolved that coal has no place in today's society and should be replaced with geothermal energy products wherever possible.
Well, thank you very much to Speaker's Corner for having me today. I'm very thankful for this opportunity to talk about geothermal. Geothermal has definitely been something that I've been studying quite a bit in the past few months. By no means, though, however, I am not an expert in geothermal, just to get that clear first. But I am an advocate and an ambassador through CanGEA, the Canadian Geothermal Energy Association. So before diving into this, I'd like into the differences between geothermal and coal. I would like to first explain how geothermal works. There's a common misconception that geothermal is simply those wells that are used to heat some homes around the cities. These type of systems would actually require heat pumps and are actually called geo-exchange technologies. Geothermal energy is heat from the earth. It is clean and sustainable. Resources of geothermal energy range from the shallow ground to hot water and hot rock assessed by drilling wells up to thousands of meters beneath the Earth's surface. The extremely high temperatures in the deeper geothermal reservoirs are used for the generation of electricity. For the purpose of this discussion, though, I'll be talking mainly about deep geothermal resources capable of producing electricity and direct heat use as well. There are three types of geothermal power plants being used to convert hydrothermal fluids to electricity. They're dry steams, flash steam, and binary cycle. The type used is dependent on the location of and the preference of the developer of the plant itself. So today, most of the newer electrical geothermal plants applications are binary cycle. So most power plants, as you know, use steam to generate electricity. The high pressure steam spins a turbine that rotates a generator, producing electricity. Keep in mind, though, most power plants are still burning fossil fuels to boil water for steam. Geothermal power plants, however, use steam produced either directly or through binary process from heat found below the Earth's surface. Binary geothermal power plants are a closed system which produce no air pollution. And unlike solar or wind energy, geothermal energy is available around the clock. And this is why we can actually compare it more to coal power plants, because they are baseload power producing plants. So baseload means 24 hour or 7. Yeah, you guys get that. Yeah, absolutely. This guy knows. Awesome. So Alberta's total power consumption in 2014 was more than around 55.4 gigawatt hour. The geothermal potential in Alberta is at least 16,200 megawatts. So that, if you convert it to rates, that's around 29% of Alberta's power consumption, providing baseload power. Combining geothermal's baseload potential with other intermittent renewables and some natural gas could greatly help in phasing out coal. Geothermal power also has substantially lower life cycle water consumption than coal, about half the water usage, and a substantially smaller land footprint. Geothermal uses around 1 to 8 acres per megawatt, and coal power plants use about 19 acres per megawatt. I know Michelle might have different numbers than me, but those are numbers that we have found somewhere. Alberta's deep subsurface heat trends are highly suitable for geothermal power and are present throughout much of the province. Geothermal power plants can operate for many decades, providing stable jobs to Alberta communities and revenue to provincial and municipal treasuries. As an example, Italy has just recently celebrated its 100th year of geothermal production at one of its power plants in Lardarello, and has helped inspire several other geothermal plants in the country, providing reliable source of energy and economic independence. I do want to note, though, although they have been producing for 100 years in Italy, the electrical output has decreased by around 30% over the 100 years since roughly especially since 1950s. And the way they've been trying to keep the pressure sustaining still is by re-injecting water back into these systems to remain those pressures. Over the course of 30 to 50 years, an average 20 megawatt facility can pay millions of dollars in property taxes and annual royalties, just as other power producing plants in Alberta do. Geothermal power is also well suited to address the electricity needs to northern and remote communities and can reduce their reliance upon fuel imports for power. Remote northern communities are not well connected to the grid for obvious reasons, therefore having a central geothermal electrical power plant for these communities would be very beneficial. So CanGEA, the Canadian Geothermal Energy Association, has recently done a geothermal mapping study in the Yukon and has found that geothermal could provide up to 40% of the 42.7 gigawatt hour average annual power consumption for the territory. Furthermore, CanGEA's study also estimates that geothermal resources can create about 65,000 temporary jobs, mainly for construction, and about 27,500 jobs in Alberta. Geothermal projects would leverage existing workforces from oil, gas, and mining and utilize transferable skills for activities such as drilling and exploration. Now, something that I'd like to point out is that if you look at most of the jobs that have been lost here in Alberta in oil patch, these are the most directly relatable, transferable skills that you can transfer into geothermal right away and re-employ the same people, I think, right away. That's right, sir. So the cost of building a geothermal power plant is currently seen as the biggest barrier to its development, and this is something that I understand as well. But currently, the estimated construction cost would range from anywhere from 2.5 million to 5 million per 1 megawatt. Its operational cost would range from 1 to 3 cents per kilowatt hour, and its energy can be sold for about 5 cents a kilowatt hour. Please keep in mind, though, that these values are from the U.S. Department of Energy and are therefore in American currency. But the reason why there is such a large range in the construction price is largely due to the depth of drilling that is required to tap into the resources. So not all depths produce the same amount of heat and therefore electrical potential. The optimal heat temperature is around 150 degrees Celsius. However, some plants today can produce electricity as low as 98 degrees Celsius using binary cycle systems. As a comparison, though, coal-fired power plants are getting increasingly expensive to construct. On average, they can go for about $3 million per megawatt. Again, Michelle might have different numbers. I understand that. But however, this cost, if true enough, is very comparable to the cost of constructing geothermal right now. Geothermal power plants have an average availability of 90% or higher. Many plants across the world have shown availabilities as high as 98%. In comparison, coal plants have an average availability of 75% on average. So what are some of the visual impacts of geothermal technologies? Well, these actually look quite nicer than coal plants. As mentioned earlier, geothermal power plants use relatively small acreages and don't require storage, transportation, or combustion of fuels. Either no emissions or just steam are visible. And nowadays, most of them will be no steam at all and just closed-loop systems. These qualities reduce the overall visual impact of power plants in scenic regions. These facilities could also be easily disguised with appropriate natural habitat and trees. In Iceland, many geothermal facilities have become a site of tourist attraction. And I really don't think we can say the same about coal plants. I don't think people are visiting them as a tourist attraction. At least I wouldn't. Neighboring communities of coal plants often also complain about the lack of plant diversity and the constant gray skies. The National Assembly of First Nations have also blamed coal plants for the majority of the acid rain that has negatively affected wildlife, plants, and waterways in and around their communities. So what's going on with geothermal right now in Canada? Well, Canada has not yet produced a single watt of geothermal energy, and we are one of the last developed countries to have tapped into this potential, and this is largely due to our abundance of oil, gas, and coal resources, of course. No worries. Here, we can talk later, sir. Yeah. So, provincial and federal incentive programs that help developers reduce upfront risk and secure power purchase agreements can also help incentivize geothermal power development provincially. However, currently there are little programs that include geothermal, even though its upfront costs are very similar to those in oil and gas, where the largest costs are associated to drilling. Furthermore, geothermal is not being recognized for its potential use of direct heat and mineral extractions during its drilling phase, whereas, like I said before, many of the other oil and gas wells that are being drilled are being considered for those programs, and therefore they get to actually write off a huge, they actually have a huge tax write-off for those programs. CanG is taking great steps in addressing these policy concerns and has received positive feedback from both federal and provincial governments. I actually spoke to Shannon Phillips, the Minister of Environment, a few weeks ago, and she has affirmed to me that there are in the process of writing legislation and involving geothermal, and they hopefully should have something out to us by 2017. I also want to acknowledge that although there isn't a single watt being produced yet in geothermal, the Borealis Geothermal Energy company is currently starting a project in Vilmont, BC, to become the first geothermal power plant in Canada. There is also a project in Yukon that is currently in a design phase as well. All right, so furthermore, as I said before, the geothermal has the most transferable skills required that could employ the same people in the oil patch right away. The biggest thing that is hindering this process are legislation. We don't have anything written that includes geothermal energy as well as the potential use for direct heat, and that is a huge problem. CanG is proposing that we use the end-of-life wells in Alberta, and there are currently over 1,000 end-of-life wells, or soon-to-be end-of-life wells, that we can simply repurpose them and put turbines on them, and that's what we are currently talking to the United States, who are proposing that we use some of their turbines that they're not using anymore, and they're going to be shipping them over for a very low cost, and then we're going to be looking at opportunities to build upon those end-of-life wells. And so we are not necessarily looking to drill tons of holes and producing unnecessary drilling. We're just looking at tapping right now the easiest sources, which are the ones that have already been mapped out by oil and gas drillers. So another great benefit of geothermal is that we can offset some of the oil monetary values and economic values by building large-scale greenhouses with direct heat all over Alberta, and especially in northern communities where otherwise we would have to actually ship some of the fossil fuels or even lots of agricultural products up north as well. We see that there is huge economic value in this, and to not having to import a lot of our foods from down south as well. Countries across the world are also phasing out in coal, and we are not the only province or country that are doing that as well. And so now coal is just becoming economically almost unviable to continue in this way, I would say. Its cost and its value, nobody really wants our product anymore, and we should become a more dependent energy producing province anyways. And geothermal, I think, would be a great way to transition into that phase, and so that we can still become an energy powerhouse in Canada, but in a different way. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to hearing Michelle's response.
Yes, thank you. I hate this thing. Sorry, I hate this thing. And it hates me too. So I'll get it out of the way. Okay, and so now we're going to hear the other side of the story. Please help me welcome to the stage Michelle Stirling. Yes, she's a contract communications manager for Friends of Science. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of this society. And one of the contributors to the Friends report, Burning Questions, an evidence-based review of the Phase Out Coal campaign. You can find the links to these on our meetup site, Speaker's Corner, as well as on our Facebook page. Or you can come up afterwards and talk to Michelle or myself, and we can give it to you. She is also an award-winning producer-writer who has worked on the global corporations on various communication projects and is the author of several books on Kindle. In 2005, Michelle worked as an information coordinator for Alberta Environment, which sparked her interest in examining the evidence over the ideology on climate change and environmental issues. Please welcome Michelle.
Thank you. Thanks very much to Speaker's Corner for welcoming me today, and Thana for our debate. As you know, my name is Michelle Stirling. I got involved in the energy debate as I formerly worked at Alberta Environment in the Deputy Minister's Office as an information coordinator. In 2013, of my own volition, I attended a phase-out coal forum, and I strongly disagreed with the air quality and anti-coal information presented there. And so I've been part of this debate ever since. Just to be clear, myself and my client, Friends of Science Society, do not represent any industry, and I have previously sworn an affidavit in public that we do not represent the coal industry and we're not funded by them. So the question today was, be it resolved that coal has no place in today's society and should be replaced with geothermal energy production where possible. So first I'd like to address the issue of geothermal energy where possible versus coal. Then I will discuss why I think coal is suitable, valuable, and affordable power generation option, particularly in a modern context with high efficiency plants and excellent emissions management, and particularly in Alberta where coal is abundant, it is of high quality and near the surface. So we need to answer three questions. One, is geothermal a viable and cost-effective power generation option in Alberta? Two, can geothermal exist without coal in Alberta? And three, why is coal's place in society and the world growing as the go-to choice for power generation? So first of all, is geothermal a viable and cost-effective power generation option in Alberta? Geothermal energy can be understood as two different types of generation. Though only one kind produces electricity, the other provides a heat source. The heat pump version of geothermal is basically a home or industrial heat pump that uses the relatively constant temperature of the earth to store up heat when it's warm and then pump it back through your house when you want some heat. It works kind of like an air conditioner. I spoke with a man who has such a geothermal system in his home as part of my research. This type of geothermal is known as ground source heat pump, or GSHP. This man lives on an acreage up around the Grand Prairie region, so he has no land restrictions. He built his system in 2007 for about $40,000. He has about a dozen bore wells, and he circulates a heated fluid which is recirculated by a 6 horsepower compressor, and with this he achieves a 350% efficiency. However, he can only get the heat up to about 21 or 22 degrees Celsius. He said the system is very slow to respond to changing weather conditions, and he also built his house with very high R factor, like R60 concrete forms that are packed with foam in the middle. So the place is extremely well insulated. Now, the downside of this system for him is that he uses huge amounts of power. He said his power bill has been $600 a month for 3 months in the winter. The carbon tax will devastate him, as will Alberta going to natural gas if Alberta phases out coal. Natural gas has been as high as $11 or $12 per gigajoule in recent past. It's now low, around $2. But that's still about double the price of coal input costs. So power prices will jump, and his heat pump operating costs will go through the roof. So to actually provide immediate heat, he burns 3 cords of birch wood. He says bringing in that much wood is really a chore. He said he feels stupid. He feels that he wasted $20,000 to $30,000 on this system, and now he'll have to convert it as power prices rise. So in summary, the ground source heat pump geothermal may have some applications in some places, but powering the heat pump by electricity means you actually need the most affordable electricity to make it work, and the most affordable electricity source is coal. The second type of geothermal, which Thana discussed, refers to heat or power sourced from deep wells in the earth. For this section of my debate, I consulted with Alberta professional geophysicist Norm Kalmanovich, and I also reviewed Professor Michael E. Wisijan's Science of Energy series in the Great Courses. So as you know, the Earth has a fairly thick crust, and then a mantle of rock, and then a molten core. The rock is a very slow conductor of heat. The heat generated from the Earth itself is in total some 46 terawatts. Since people already use about 18 terawatts of power in energy from conventional sources like oil, coal, natural gas, hydro, nuclear, and wood, it's clear that geothermal in its present technological state can never provide sufficient power for our growing needs. It can only ever be a complementary heat or power source. And then, geothermal is very dependent on geography and geology. If you are in Iceland, which is basically one big volcano, then geothermal is the perfect solution. Your heat source is near the surface and you can tap into it in a few different ways. And if you have a hot enough source of steam or hot rocks to drive a turbine, you can generate electricity. But this possibility is very dependent on your geology and location. And therein lies the problem for Alberta. According to information from Norm, a professional geophysicist, the main problem in Alberta is our geography. There are very few places that have what is called a suitable thermal gradient for tapping into geothermal heat. One of the few places is the upper northwest corner of the province where my interviewee lives. And you can see this after on the graphs over here. There's a chart showing where the heat sits at two different levels within the province. One is 2 kilometers down and one is 5 kilometers down. So overall, this is a sparsely populated area, and it is far from power generation needs of Albertans and our industry. And industry presently uses 75% of the power generated in Alberta. If you look at the two maps, you can see the relative temperatures at depths of 5 kilometers or 2 kilometers, and there are not a lot of suitable places for geothermal. Now, some people would argue we could simply develop deeper drilling and new technology and thus access this free power, or as Thana indicated, use old wells and drill down. But in Alberta, you would have to drill deep to get the wells deep enough to be at the 125 degrees Celsius temperature requirement for geothermal, and drilling is very, very costly. Also, I just want to mention here, Thana had mentioned that oil and gas companies seem to get some kind of subsidy for their work, and that's not true. They don't get a particular subsidy. They get the same development write-off that any business has for development costs. So there is no direct subsidy up front for oil and gas. So according to Professor Wisijan, we can presently only drill to about 12 kilometers in depth, and that costs a fortune. So, like with wind turbines, the idea that the power source of geothermal is free is offset by the extraordinary cost to capture this free power. But there are other significant problems with geothermal in Alberta. As many of you know, this term, sour gas, or hydrogen sulfide, is often released in drilling in Alberta. In fact, we have become world experts in managing this potentially deadly gas, because much of the geology beneath Alberta's land is permeated with this gas. Due to the nature of geothermal installations, where some are pumping cold water down to hot rocks to create steam to drive turbines, the risk of release of H2S or even a catastrophic explosion of rock and gases is quite high, especially in Alberta, where we have so much hydrogen sulfide. And this is a deadly gas. Anyone who works in the oil patch has to take an H2S safety course before they ever go out there. Likewise, even in countries where hot magma is nearer the surface than it is in Alberta, magma is so hot you can't drill too close to it or your equipment melts, which has happened in Iceland. So in answer to the first question, is geothermal viable and cost-effective power generation in Alberta? In my view, the answer is no. There are few suitable geographic locations. These are generally far from where people live. Geothermal is not a significant means of power generation in any part of the world. Drilling deep enough would be very cost prohibitive, rendering the so-called free source of power one of the most expensive. And in Alberta, there's a high risk of release of deadly hydrogen sulfide. 2, can geothermal exist without coal in Alberta? Well, the premise of this debate was that coal should be phased out completely. As I discussed in the ground source heat pump section, according to the testimony of an owner of such a system, he requires vast amounts of electricity to run the pumps. Therefore, he would prefer to have the most affordable power, coal. Coal is also the most stable in terms of price versus natural gas, and the most reliable in terms of consistent, on-demand power. In Alberta particularly, we have centuries of coal. To drill for geothermal power generation from steam produced from hot rocks far below the surface, you would need lots of electrical power. Most drill rigs have diesel-powered generators. These are made from special high-quality steel, as is the rig, and the steel can only be made at this quality using coal in the process. The geothermal facility is also made of steel. Again, the manufacturing process of making a geothermal facility requires coal for the steel. So in my view, these kind of ultimatums made by some members of the anti-coal or anti-fossil fuel activist community are quite unrealistic. Today, the world runs on 3 cubic miles of oil equivalent energy. 1 cubic mile is oil. The second largest is coal at 0.8 cubic miles of oil equivalent energy. According to world projections compiled by Robert Lyman, who is an energy economist, the use of coal worldwide will grow dramatically. And there's a little map down there that shows the different countries that are producing steel. And when you look at the map of the world of steel-producing countries, it gives you a sense of how crucial steel is to a modern economy, and so is coal. So why, number 3, why is coal's place in society and the world growing as the go-to choice for power generation? So in this, I disagree with Thana's contention that coal is falling behind. It's actually growing. Coal use is growing around the world because it's abundant, affordable, and portable. Unlike geothermal, which can only work where the geothermal plant is built, coal can be shipped anywhere and used in any quantity, from a cold stove, like my grandparents had, to a modern new ultra-critical coal plant. In Alberta, coal provided 55% of the power generation in 2014. Now think about that, 55%. That is a huge amount of power to try and replace. Natural gas was the second provider, 35%. So 90% of the power in Alberta came from fossil fuels in 2014, and partly because we have lots of coal here, as shown on the map down there. So presently, the Alberta government wants to phase out coal, but people need to understand that this would cost Albertans over $11 billion just to build replacement capacity plants powered by natural gas. And you need to replace all of the coal capacity with natural gas because you need 100% on-demand system. Although the government plans to replace 2/3 of the generating capacity of coal with wind and solar, this will not do because wind and solar are intermittent power sources. Sometimes there's 100% of the power, sometimes there's nothing at all. In Alberta in 2014, wind provided just 4% of our power. 4%. You know how the city loves to say the C train runs on the wind? Well, tell me how it does that 24 hours a day when there's only 4% power from wind for all of Alberta. Obviously, that's baloney. What they mean is that the city of Calgary buys carbon offsets from a wind farm and pretends that this displaces the coal and natural gas-fired power that really drives the C train. So that's kind of deceptive marketing. I think it's false and misleading to make people think the C train runs on the wind. That's impossible. So likewise, in addition to the $11 billion to phase out coal, it will cost more than another $11 billion to compensate the coal industry and investors. People invested in brand new coal plants in Alberta, and one of them, Keep Hills 3, was the most advanced coal-fired power plant in North America when it went into operation. This means it has supercritical technology. This is not your granny and grandpa's coal plant. These plants are very efficient, they have excellent emissions management, and they filter out about 99% of the soot, or the PM 2.5, from the coal. There are 6 of these more advanced plants. Not all of them have the same technology, but they're all advanced, and they all have a useful life to the end of 2050. So why would we close them down? If the idea is to reuse and recycle, why would we disable something that works very well and is at a very high standard and has a long-term useful life? All the countries that went to Paris and signed the big agreement on climate went home the next day and started building more than 2,000 coal plants. You know what? They want a strong economy in their country, and they know that you need affordable power for that. Another thing to consider, if we replace coal with wind and solar, we have to build many more transmission lines, and the same for geothermal, because it's not going to be near the city. So these transmission lines cost billions of dollars, and you end up paying for it. The line south to Pincher Creek wind farms cost $2.2 billion. That's for 4% power. Think about this. The Shepard natural gas plant here in Calgary cost only about $1.4 billion, and it puts out 800 megawatts of power on demand almost year-round. Coal-fired power plants today have reduced noxious emissions, including mercury reduction. In fact, most of the mercury in Alberta is deemed to come from overseas coal plants in China. And also some comes from the wildfires, because yes, wildfires in North America dump about 44 tons of mercury on the continent every year. As well, going back to the proposed coal phase out, the Alberta government is proposing to add wind and solar, but these are the most expensive forms of power generation. So right now, the actual power prices in Alberta are at an all-time low. So as Thana mentioned that geothermal would like to get some subsidies, the wind and solar people say they can't make money producing power unless they get a subsidy. So we asked an industry expert what that would cost for wind and solar, and he said, if the government were subsidizing renewable energy certificates to wind and solar at $35 a megawatt hour, and the government wants to replace 4,500 megawatts of existing coal with 2/3 renewables, that means about 3,000 megawatt equivalent. So if you multiply 3,000 megawatt times $35 per megawatt, you get about $900 million a year in subsidies paid by you, the taxpayer, to the energy sector. And right now, just so you know, Alberta is the only province in Canada that has no debt for public utilities. You know, if you look at Ontario, they have a debt of $44 billion. Quebec is $55 billion. And we have no public debt for our utilities. So if we move into this subsidy area, that's the road we're going down. So anyway, so the deficit forecast would balloon by almost another $1 billion a year, according to that expert. And for what? For power that's not clean, green, or free. So why would we want to go to power generation systems that increase costs and risks and reduce reliability?
We go to the greenhouse.
Finally, what of new technologies? I spoke with a chemical engineer who tells me there's a technology that will be able to harvest graphene directly from the stack and turn that into a useful product. So that's not quite market ready, but it just gives you an idea that there are many things we can do. And after my previous debate with Dr. Vipond aired on Shaw Cable, I was contacted by one of the principals at CCR Technologies, who's right here in Calgary, and they wanted me to know they have a working technology developed in Alberta that's operational on one of the 5 stacks at Boundary Dam Coal Plant in Saskatchewan. He said this technology is extracting and reclaiming valuable materials from the emissions. It's working technology and it could be exported around the world. But first, he said it would be possible to refit all our existing coal plants for about the 1/5 of the price of phase-out coal. So in closing, in my view, people got on the human-caused global warming bandwagon in the past 20 years, because many environmental groups were funded by billionaire philanthropies in the States who wanted to do good. But the catastrophic method of talking about how humans affect climate became a great way to raise money. Remember how David Suzuki Foundation ran that misleading ad about where will Santa live? And they showed Santa floating in the Arctic, in a melting Arctic. Well, surprise, surprise, the Arctic does melt from time to time. 8,000 years ago, it was a tropical paradise where polar bears were quite happy, and they have survived to this day. I do believe human activity does affect climate and this world, but the case against carbon dioxide, which is one of the principal reasons why people condemn coal use, is not proven. In fact, despite a rise in carbon dioxide over the past 20 years, there's been no significant rise in temperature. Thus, I believe it would be a mistake to deprive Albertans of a valuable, affordable, reliable fuel source like coal. I think it would be immoral and unethical for our government to intentionally put some 7,000 people out of work in the coal generation communities. And it would be disastrous for these low economic times to move off coal to far more expensive forms of power generation. In light of the fact that we do have new technologies that improve emissions management and efficiency of coal every year, we should emphasize those technological improvements and not abandon these valuable riches that Albertans own. Just so you know, Denmark, which is always cited as being so green, actually runs on about 48% coal, and Alberta, 55%. Denmark has to import coal at $60 a ton. For us, it's almost free. As for geothermal, it seems Alberta's geology is not suitable for geothermal power generation. For the ground source heat pump, some individuals may choose this, but overall it does not seem to be cost effective or the most suitable for this changing weather. I favor the development of new technologies, but I recommend we take slow and careful steps. We have a great power system in Alberta, largely because of the heroic efforts of the people at Alberta Electrical System Operator, the ISO, who makes sure it works all the time, and the 95% power from the many providers of coal, natural gas, and the supplementary sources that make up the 5% remainder. So I say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Thank you.
I'd like to thank you very much, Michelle. That was very informative for both of you. And now I believe Thana wants to has rebut. Okay, good. My name is
Thank you, and thank you, Michelle. I did learn quite a bit myself as well. And first of all, I'm not even going to tackle the topic of climate change. To me, you know, when you have 96% of the world scientists already agreeing that climate change is real, I don't think it needs me adding on to this topic as well here. Now, geothermal may be expensive. Oh, I can't even read my notes anymore. Anyways, ground source pump, I'm not a big fan of those as well either. They are very expensive, and that's why I've joined with CanGeo, which is the Geothermal Energy Association, which we don't talk about ground source pumps at all. We were talking about very deep heat producing wells. And by no means would ground source geo-exchange pumps be replacing coal anytime soon. I do recognize that it's a huge electrical heat or electrical consuming process, and that's why I would not even go near that at the moment. Iceland is not the only country that is producing a large sum of electricity from geothermal. Our neighboring country in the United States, in California, is actually the largest geothermal electrical producing country in the world, and I think we can actually model a lot of their system in Alberta, and especially in BC as well. Now, I know you said that in Alberta we don't have that much potential, but our recent new studies that CanGeo has made has proven differently. And we strongly believe that with new technological developments that are currently happening, and very quickly, we can actually have much lower required heat to produce these electricity systems for geothermal. And I think that'd be good for both of us, I really do. And anyways, I will continue. And in terms of subsidies that are that you said that are not available for, you said, for oil and gas. The ones that we are specifically talking about are the CEE and the CDE, so the Canadian Exploration Expense as well as the Canadian Development Expense. Now, the federal government has acknowledged that there is not a fair level playing field for geothermal. And these two expenses right here are mainly for dry wells. So anytime in oil and gas they go and drill and they miss for these dry wells, they get to have a tax write-off for these, and geothermal don't. And so that we are just trying to get on a level playing field so that we can actually have those benefits as well. And like I said, this is something that they recognize, and we've talked to many politicians, elected politicians, who agree with this and who will be fighting with us to gain recognition in these fields as well. And also like to recognize that even Wild Rose leader Brian Jean has been in contact a lot with CanGEA and is wanting to work with us in developing the proper policies in order for them to be successful in Alberta. So anything from left to right-wing politics, everyone is kind of on board now and recognizing its full potential. And you know, just like cell phones, only 7 years ago everybody was on flip phones, and now everybody is on crazy smartphones. The same thing can happen with all technologies, and I want to recognize that if we put a bit more effort in geothermal, it can be an energy powerhouse, even in Alberta where the heat sinks aren't as high as they are in Iceland, let's say, but we can develop the right technologies to make them a viable option. And only with having more interest in these types of technologies can they actually develop and get funded quickly. For example, in oil and gas, many years ago, these processes were not quite affordable until the government got involved and had some input in these systems as well. And so that's what we're looking for, is an equal level playing field. In terms of sulfur being produced by geothermal wells, well, I'm talking mainly about geothermal binary closed loop system, because these are all the ones that are being built nowadays. Most geothermal developers will not even look at an open system because we do recognize of these SOx of sulfur and nitrogen oxide harmful potentials as well. And so, in my eyes, there would be zero sulfur in the new geothermal wells, so that is not a concern. I can't even read my own writing anymore here. So coal for building metal supplies. Well, we recognize that coal, the metallurgical, I'm not even saying that metallurgical coal is still very important and will play a big role. What we are more concerned about are the coal that is used for burning and used for power. That is what we do not like, but we do recognize a huge coal benefits still in the steel section of the industry. So that is something that will still be there for quite some time, I think. I'm going to wrap it up here. I really do think that these types of discussions are really important, regardless of what side of the fence you sit on. It really forces us to see where we're missing the point and to actually push us to learn more about how we can improve our own sectors and our own industries. But my question to you all would be, why not try to go clean? Even if I was half right, even if I was 20% right, why not try to benefit all of humanity and not just one sector? Geothermal is clean, so we could live beside these power plants and not have to worry about our health. Yes, maybe it's not as harmful as you describe coal factories to be, but I don't think any of us here would want to live beside a coal plant. We definitely wouldn't, and I would feel very safe living beside a geothermal plant. So thank you very much, though. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Regarding the subsidies, we did do a report called Keep Canada in the Black, and we reviewed these alleged subsidies to oil and gas. And it's not true that they're a subsidy. They are a conventional part of the tax system. Any business has exactly the same kinds of development write-offs. And regarding the funding and the setup, basically the principle should be that if it's a great idea, then industry and investors would come forward and put their money up without having to have a subsidy. Otherwise, if the public has to underwrite it to start it, then there's probably something wrong with it. Like it's not viable. We see that with Solyndra, Abengoa. I mean, there are many big wind and solar companies that are now going bankrupt, taking billions of dollars with them that have been very heavily subsidized, and lots of job losses. And the other thing you did mention, that the U.S. is the world's biggest producer. It is true, I agree with that. And you have to look at the U.S. The U.S. Yellowstone, which I don't believe does have geothermal there, but Yellowstone is the world's biggest caldera, as far as I know. It's a huge, unblown up underground volcano, basically, and one of the biggest geothermal facilities in the States, I think, is on the San Andreas Fault. You know, so they are accessing actual faults in the earth where it's easy to get at that geothermal. As I pointed out, in Alberta, that's just not the case. We just don't have that kind of mantle here. And again, I disagree with you about the H2S, because it's permeated most of the rock in Alberta, and that's why we are the experts on hydrogen sulfide. So anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you. So does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask?
I have 3. You may as well.
Greedy man, 3, all right.
Well, I'll step aside.
So 3 questions, all of them for you, Thana. Okay, so firstly, actually I'm just asking you initially to repeat a stat that I didn't quite catch. What percentage of current coal consumption could be replaced by geothermal? Did I hear 29%? Yes. Did you hear? 29%? Okay, so it's pretty. And where does that statistic come from? Just measurements? Okay, thank you. Not necessary. Secondly, in what way does the absence of legislation hinder the development of geothermal, other than what I understood you to be saying, an absence of incentive? But in what other way does the absence of legislation hinder geothermal development?
Well, without the proper legislation in place, and without even the word geothermal in policy, there's a huge perceived notion of risk, and that goes with any new technology that hasn't been tested in any jurisdiction, and that is the biggest fear, is the notion of rejection of any project. I mean, I'm currently facing that with my company right now. In stormwater, we have a patent and a new technology that's never been tested, but because of that, nobody really wants to approve our project because of the fear that it won't work.
Okay, lastly, I understood this debate, the pro side of the resolution to be, namely, be it resolved that there's no place for coal in today's energy production regime, and that it should be replaced or superseded by geothermal where available. And in your rebuttal, I understood you to be saying, well, why can't geothermal coexist with coal? Did I hear that wrong? Oh, okay, I thought I
feel like I'm stealing the mic a lot now, but no, coal to me should not be coexisting in terms of the burning of the fossil fuels to create power. I do believe that coal can exist as a metallurgic source to produce steel, and that is a huge difference to me. I understand that geothermal cannot replace all of the coal usage and producing electricity right now in Alberta. However, some of that will be replaced with natural gas, but I strongly believe that with the intermittent sources and the really quick technological advances in battery storage, things will change and we will be able to use more renewables throughout all of Alberta. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions they'd like to ask? Oh, you know you want to ask a question. You can just shout it out if you're shy. Okay. Well, I have a question for you. It was recently brought up at the alumni weekend at the university that the concern is putting all your eggs in one basket for the future. If we do look specifically at one source for energy, and then your price goes through the roof. A lot of the specialists there felt that we needed to combine all the different sources. And I want to know if anyone from any of these groups are actually talking to these other people in these other groups to try and work together to create a future of coexistence, as Gabor had mentioned coexistence. Michelle?
Well, I think if people go online and look at the Alberta Electrical System Operator reports from the past years and this year, you will find that the ISO had set out that by 2035 or so, we would be maybe only 12% coal, and the wind would be somewhat bigger, and we'd still have natural gas, and we'd have solar. So there'd be kind of a blend of cogeneration would be quite substantially increased, and some biomass. And that kind of thing is a good hedge against the possible increase in market rates. If you look here, we have a graph that shows what the price of natural gas was in the recent past. It's now quite low, but if we go to natural gas, and we probably will have to replace the coal, if we proceed with the coal phase out, then we're at total risk of having the grid resting on natural gas. And let's say we open an LNG plant on the coast, boom, the price of natural gas could go sky high. And you have to look, I talked to the trader and he said, you have to look like 30 years down the road, because the US is also phasing out coal in some places. And so the price of natural gas could really skyrocket, and we would be really stuck. So it's better to have a full mix. I don't know if people are working together. Like, some of the views are quite contrary. Just basically, I would say the costs of the transmission lines for wind and solar also cost $1 million a megawatt to integrate to the grid because they're so unreliable. So it's a very expensive option for the little power you get back. Anyway.
Thank you. Did you have anything to add to that, too?
I do agree with some of the stuff you are saying, Michelle, and I've actually been approached by ASO as well, who are looking at understanding how geothermal can play a bigger role in our system and in our grid. And but there is a large problem in working together. I'm going to take a quick shot here at the wind and solar people as well, but Kenji has been trying to approach at the solar and wind people to try to work together, but they are, unfortunately, it comes down to making a business and to making a living, and for that reason, in a capitalistic world, unfortunately, people try to monopolize anything they come in touch with. So the wind people do see a huge market and opportunity in capitalizing on all of the renewables, and that's why geothermal is having a hard time even entering some of the renewables here in Alberta, because we're not talking enough about working together, and I think that is a huge problem. And I think even the geothermal people should be talking to coal and seeing how can all maybe have a place and go from there.
Thank you. I know another point that we brought out, we were looking actually at 50 years from now. Since it was the 50-year anniversary, we're looking the next 50 years. The point was brought out too is the focus point right now. Everyone's looking at what's wrong with everyone else. They want to see, how do we get people to start looking at, okay, we've got something, it's working, how can we make it work better? Do either of you know if your side of the argument, I guess here, coal or geothermal, or any of the others, are actually looking at taking what we already have and making it better instead of, hey, let's replace it?
Well, I would say that actually regarding coal, that's one of the kind of best kept secrets about it is I was at a conference at the university a couple of years ago on renewable energy, and one of the people on the panel said, well, you know, we all remember London in the 50s and the smog. It's like, that was 65 years ago. So, you know, the coal technology in the past 30, 40 years has just zoomed past what it used to be as a, you know, a very kind of clunky industrial era type of technology. Today it's very supercritical, very clean. Every day there's new improvements, and as I told you, the CCR technologies have means of extracting reclaimable materials from the stack emissions, and that's a fantastic step forward. So I think that there's a lot of focus on making coal the choice through technology. Anyway, that's what I've understood.
Thank you. You have a closing remark with?
I got a lot of friends who work in the energy sector, and their companies are obviously trying to find new technological ways of making their productions much cleaner. And from what I'm hearing, though, there are lots of innovative ideas that we should actually start looking at and maybe consider them. But at the end of the day, we should have a large range of mix of energy producing sources, and I think geothermal will play a huge role in having to convert some of the base load right now from coal into renewables. And I think we need to have the large range so that we don't put all our eggs in one basket, or else we'll continue having big, large boom and bust. And we need to keep our expertise and our skilled workers here in Alberta. So, yeah.
So I'd just like to express my gratitude for the speakers. They take their time, takes time to prepare to come here. They kind of put themselves out, remove themselves from their families and activities. So I'd like to thank you. We're also grateful for the audience, and I want to thank you for being here.